is, what is this drafting table for?
Oh, that's actually an old Great Northern
Is it?
drafting table, and
Okay.
it came out of the Monroe Depot.
All right.
There's a civil engineer in there named Paul Cavassa
Yeah.
that I got to know, and he took over that half of that building there, and he was looking for pictures of the Monroe Depot, and so I did some searching for him, and I never could find any detailed
Yeah.
photos of the building, but I have the blueprints
Okay.
for the building, and so his secretary borrowed them from me to take them up to Bill's blueprinting there in Everett and have copies made off of them,
Okay.
and had them framed so he could hang them in his office.
Mm.
And I went up there for the ceremony to surprise him with these things. And when she brought them out framed up, I thought they were the originals. I thought maybe she'd misunderstood me and thought I was giving her those.
Yeah.
They had done such a good job of reproducing them that they looked just like the originals.
Wow.
And I'm like, how do I ask for these back? She's giving them to her boss right now. But then after the ceremony, she took me out to the car and gave me my originals back,
Oh, okay.
much to my relief.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I told her, I said, man, those look like the originals. They did a really great job
Really
of
did
them.
a great job. Yeah.
But anyway, at one point, they wanted to get rid of this drafting table, and they asked if I wanted it.
Yeah.
And I'm somewhat of an artist, or I used to be. I'm losing my ability. I've lost a lot of feeling in this hand anymore, and so I can't draw like I
Well, tell
used
me a
to.
little bit about that. Now, you were a cartoonist?
Well, I was aspired to be a cartoonist.
Yeah.
It was my dream to do a strip, and I drew up a bunch of characters and stuff and a few sample strips, but never got any further than that.
What were the railroad themes or just political? What was it?
Mine was a kind of I had a guy named uh, Gabby Hayseed that was he's like an old prospector type of guy, and then he had a buddy with him that I called Dirty Harry,
Okay.
and
Oh, I wonder is that a Clint Eastwood reference?
yeah, and it was just a kind of a old west comic strip type thing,
Okay.
and then I out of desperation for work after the Milwaukee shutdown, I ended up starting my own sign and graphics business, and so I did that for 16 years. I
Okay.
painted signs, everything from truck lettering to billboards and stuff,
Wow.
and I got into silk screening and did shirts and
Yeah.
stuff like that too.
Okay. Okay.
And so I had this drafting table down in my sign shop, and it's actually a light table,
Okay.
um,
Oh, look at that.
but the glass got broke, so I got to get another glass for it.
Oh, okay.
And then this is falling apart, but I have a replacement for that in the shed. So,
Oh.
so it's my hope to get it back up and running again, and at least use it for some drawing purposes. I still try to draw cartoons for the train order club that I belong to. There's a club called the International Association of Train Order Collectors.
Really?
It's been going since late 50s, I think.
You and Dave Sprout.
Dave doesn't belong to it. I guess
Oh.
Dave belonged to it in the early years
Okay.
and stuff, but I joined it when I was about 18 years old. I told you I collected train orders
Yes.
from the time I was 16.
Yes.
Well, I thought in my mind, I thought I was the only person in the world that would save these things,
Yeah.
because I never ran into anybody else that
Oh, no.
looking
Where
for
was
them or
you?
anything. And so for the first couple of years, I thought I was the only guy crazy enough to want to save these pieces of paper.
Oh, I got them too.
Well, then an article came out in Railroad Magazine
Yeah.
telling about this group of people that had their own club. So I joined the club, and you send in train orders and in trade for orders that you order from the.
Okay.
They'd put out a newsletter, and back then the newsletter was monthly. Now it's quarterly.
All right.
But I still belong to it, and I still get train orders from the club.
And there's still a couple of hundred members or a couple thousand.
No, there's only 40, and it
Oh.
seems like we never get beyond that.
Okay.
We get some new members, and then somebody dies. So,
Wow.
or drops out or whatever. And so we seem to stay right at about 40 members. So there's only 40 of us that are diehards. Now on Facebook, I'm a co-moderator of a train order group there.
Oh, okay.
And I answer questions and post train orders on that group all the time and stuff. So I stay pretty active that way. And then I just bought a collection. All those binders there
Are all train orders?
are all somebody's collection that I bought that came up on eBay.
All right.
And
what are train orders selling for on eBay these days?
well, there's about 1,100 train orders there, and I paid about $1,000 for it. So,
Okay.
So a little under $1 a piece. But there's a lot of train orders in there that I think are worth way more than $1 a piece. I mean, there's a John F. Kennedy Memorial train order where they had all trains stopped for 1 minute at the time of his funeral.
Oh, in 1963.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's a train order in there for that, and there's several historical train orders in there. There was a guy who was the president of the Santa Fe Railroad, and he died about a month after he retired.
Oh.
And so they put out orders for trains to stop and sit for 5 minutes in memorial to him. And Ripley was his name.
Yes, I remember the name. Yeah.
Yeah, he was pretty famous in the Santa Fe because he became president at the time Santa Fe was in a big scandal.
Oh.
And he brought the Santa Fe out of that scandal and restored the public's faith in
Well, that's always a pretty well-run organization. I'm surprised that they would have had a scandal, but
yeah,
they don't keep track of all their details.
Yeah, this was back in the 90s, I think, 1890s.
Oh, 1890s.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't around. I didn't keep track of that.
Yeah, because this order is from 1920, so he retired in 1920. So he'd been president of Santa Fe for several decades by then. But anyway, yeah, there's a lot of, and then that collection netted me about 60 new railroads that I didn't have train orders from before.
Excellent.
So it really put me up in the
higher echelon.
the elite train order collectors now. But
okay, time out for 1 second. I just want to do one quick thing, and I want to be able to bring Clint a little bit more into the picture. So now you've got Clint right next to you. I just thought that would, right? Yeah, it works. So then you've got some things that you want to share with us, the documents and some of the things that you've collected. Why don't we take a look at some of the things you've got, and we can put them here on the table, and then we can kind of talk about them. Do you want to do that?
Well, basically physical stuff I've got is the books here of photographs, and this is, oops, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hurt that, did I?
No, we're all good.
Okay. But this is an album of photographs of strictly Cedar Falls.
Okay, well, why don't we take a look at some of these?
This is basically a lot of the stuff that's on the screen there too. But this is the depot under construction, and here we see the old original depot. A couple of views looking eastbound from the yard there. Okay. And you got a big steam shovel or some piece of equipment there. That's probably being used to build the yard for when they put the yard in there. Yeah, I got so many photos that. Yeah, I pretty much put everything I know about these photos on the back of them. Okay. But there's the Moncton Depot. Yeah. Here's the depot under construction.
The new Cedar Falls would eventually be the Cedar Falls Depot.
Yeah.
Okay, but
and this was opened in the fall of 1911. And I believe this was opening day here, and I noticed that these two windows in the bay, the top windows are down. Oh, and this is in the fall in October, so the weather should be cool. Yeah. I'm guessing that these windows are down because the varnish on the walls inside the new depot is probably overpowering.
Because it hadn't really dried yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it would all be it was all natural wood in there originally.
Yes, exactly. Yep. Yeah.
And then did they eventually paint the inside of it, or?
Yeah, in later years they started painting. I think they originally started with a yellow paint. It was kind of a yellow on the upper part of the wall, and then kind of a brownish from about where the chairboard would be down.
Okay.
And then in later years, then that evolved into a two-tone green sag in it
Oh,
and stuff.
yeah, I was noticing it was getting a little lumpy.
All these depots had just piling foundations, and so that would finally, they just drove piling in the ground and then put stringers on top of those, and so as that decayed, that caused the depots to belly and sag.
So what's going on in this picture?
This is pulling up the rails off of Snoqualmie Pass.
Oh, it is.
What they had is a tractor that would go up there and it would tie on to a length of rail.
Yeah.
And they would drag it down in quarter-mile lengths or whatever, and then they would feed it up onto this rail train. And they took it to Laurel, Montana, and there they cut and resized the rail, and then Burlington Northern used it for wherever they needed rail at.
Oh, okay.
But this rail train got some measure of revenge, because one of the rails, when they were hauling it back to Montana, one of the rails broke loose and stuck out and knocked down a whole bunch of block signals and damaged a couple of bridges up around Index area.
Oh, my.
Before they finally got the train stopped and figured out what was going on.
So then, is this a city light sign, or?
Yep, yeah, that was there for the whole time that I worked there, telling you that you couldn't go beyond this depot.
Oh, okay.
This was all within the city watershed area, so you couldn't go beyond that.
Now, what are some of these other? It looks like you've got some people on a speeder car.
Yeah, this would have been a speeder that came down from the dam on the City Light Railroad.
Okay.
And this guy's got a suitcase, so it looks like he's down here to catch the main Milwaukee Road passenger train, probably to go somewhere for City Light business, or maybe he came from somewhere else to do something at the dam, and now he's returning back to wherever he came from. But
Okay.
I don't have much background information on that. This is looking down off the hill. Here's the bridge over Hobo Creek.
Yeah.
There's the Milwaukee water tank, the Milwaukee yards, the Milwaukee depot. That sign is on the hill right about here somewhere, the city light sign.
Okay.
Here we got a Malley picking up the pasture train at Cedar Falls.
And the Malleys would have worked. Would have worked at like Snoqualmie and down to Enumclaw and stuff.
Well, not this early.
Okay.
That was in the 40s that they started using Malleys on the branch lines. This would have been the freight helper out of Cedar Falls, but this train is probably a Columbian, and it has extra cars on it, so they're putting a Malley on there for a helper. Whereas in this one, they have a Mikado on there for the helper, and that was the normal one. And then see, the road engine is taking on water while they tie the helper onto the.
And this would have been prior to, what was it, 1919 when
This,
the electrification?
yeah, this was about 1912 or so, because it's still Chicago, Milwaukee, and Puget Sound.
Okay.
And they ended at the end of 1912.
Okay.
So this was back, of course, when it was all steam powered. Here's a westbound passenger train sitting at the depot, and look at the steam leaking out.
Everywhere, yeah. Yeah, westbound no less.
And there's the original beanery and the engineman's bunkhouse, and then here's the beanery. This is a Steinheimer shot with the deer.
Yeah, exactly. Now, did they have a little bit of an electrification that went up the Everett branch?
Yeah, there was
How did that work?
well, there was a siding down here that they called the sanitary track.
Okay.
And it had actual outdoor or indoor type toilets that were flushable with a septic system because of the watershed, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's where they would put the bunk cars and stuff when they'd have a steel gang or a bridge and building gang or a track gang or any of those gangs that had outfit cars to live in. They would spot them on what they called the sanitary track, and then they could use those toilet facilities to please the watershed police.
Versus what they would normally do,
Yeah.
which is just go out the back door, right?
Right, and so they had the overhead catenary on the Everett line for about a mile to get down to service that track.
Okay, got it.
And then there's the oil plant. Here's the tank. And then there's the oil column there, and then they had another water column over here.
And so all the steam was running on oil by then. Now explain a little bit about this oil tank or the fuel oil plant for us.
Okay, well, they would spot tank cars of bunker C oil here. They had troughs where they could open the valves underneath the cars, and then the bunker C would run down these troughs and into this 500,000 gallon sump tank that they stored the oil in.
Okay.
Then they had a pump house here, and you can see again the pump house
There's
over
pump
here.
house, okay.
That had a Scotch Marine boiler in there for a pump, and they would pump the oil from the sump here up into this tank and fill this tank. Then they could service locomotives just by gravity feed from there to this standpipe.
Okay.
So it was an ingenious setup because they only had to hire one person to run the oil plant.
Oh.
And he'd just work a day shift, and by the end of his shift, he'd have to fill that tank up, and then trains could come in here in the middle of the night and get oil without anybody having to run the plant. It's just gravity feed.
So did they use that fuel oil plant into the diesel era then too, or not?
No, it was done by the time the diesels came along. That's why it ended up as just a brick stand here. The tank was worth some money and scrap value, so they scrapped the steel tank out. And these are standing in lots of different places. There's one over in Beverly.
Yeah.
There's one in Hagen, Montana. There's one in Malden. Just about anywhere that they serviced locomotives, they had those.
Okay, so that explains what the one in Beverly was then. So then is this a picture of like the railroad camp or the city light camp?
This is the town down in Rattlesnake Lake.
Okay, what
These are
happened to that?
Well, they had to evacuate it because when they built the masonry dam, it started leaking. And there was a little spring in the town there, and that spring was fed from the river underground, and when they built the masonry dam and started to fill it up, it put pressure on that, and this spring started to flood. And you can see this house here looks to me like these are company railroad houses, but this one looks to me like it's painted in the orange and maroon and white scheme like the depots.
Oh, it's possible.
So they probably got some paint from the B&B and painted their house with it. But up here you can see the school. In this picture, it's only a one-story. It was originally a two-story school, but they had a big snowstorm that caved in the top story of the school, so they just rebuilt it as a one-story.
And this is now the community that's under Rattlesnake Lake.
Yeah, now here's a house flooded, under construction, and that was the Dyer house. Now, Davy Dyer was the engine watchman at Everett when I worked there. But his father was a boilermaker that worked up in Cedar Falls, and he was building this house when the lake flooded him out. And here's another house that when this lake flooded, they just left those houses there, and they were floating around in the lake for several years. Finally, Seattle City Light wanted to get rid of them, so they had crews come in and dismantle them and haul that stuff out of there. But you can still see foundations. I remember seeing when the lake got really low one year, on the ground you could see an outline of where a house had been because of the nails. The wood rotted away and the nails all fell on the ground and created a rust trail outline of the house. And then I remember seeing a cedar rail fence that's still under the lake and an orchard. There's a bunch of little dead trees for somebody had an orchard that died. And of course, it's just a close-up of the brick stand. Now, the bottom part of it is all concrete foundation. Then you got brick on top of that, and then you had the steel tank on top of that.
Oh, I imagine the city would love to get rid of that thing.
And these are various helper engines up at Cedar Falls,
Back in the steam
back in
years.
the steam area.
Because when they had electrics, they had enough power to be able to get trains over the hill, I would think.
Right. This is that one with all the snow on it.
Snow, yeah.
And then, see, there's a flanger on the front.
Yeah.
They used to put that on every winter, and they could raise and lower it from the cab. And this would be the helper engine on the passenger train, but he would also do double duty as a flanger going up to Laconia and back. And then these are the bigger Malley helpers.
And when did they start using that? When did they start? What was the history of the Malleys? I want to ask.
Well,
Falls.
the Milwaukee had no experience with mountain railroading when they built Lines West Extension,
Right.
and so they built a whole fleet of of Prairie class engines, and that's what they were going to use on the new extension. And they soon found out why they were called Prairies.
They're good on flat.
They didn't work in the mountains worth a hoot, and they'd have to put sometimes 3 Prairies on a train to get it up the hill. And so they decided that we need something better. So then they went to the Mikado.
Okay.
So they ordered 25 Mikado engines and used those for helpers.
Okay.
But they still needed something even bigger, so then they started buying Malleys.
Okay.
And so that's why the Milwaukee ended up with Malleys, is because of the mountain service
And
that they
used
had to
them
do.
primarily out here then.
Yeah, they used them out here until the electrification made them obsolete.
Yeah.
Then they transferred a bunch of them to the Trans-Missouri Division and the Muscle Shell Division.
Oh.
And one of those divisions had nothing but trouble with them and got rid of them. The other division, they
Liked them fine.
liked them just fine.
Yeah.
And then the ones that whatever division rejected them, then they had surplus Malleys, and that's when they started experimenting with running them on branch lines and stuff like that. And then they used a certain amount of them through the gap. But what they ended up doing is that the Malleys were compound when they bought them, and they
Right.
used the steam twice.
Right.
And they were slow and very inefficient. So the Milwaukee simplified a bunch of them and got them up to where they could run at decent speed. So they put them in the gap between Othello and Avery, and had them handle freight trains there. And they even handled passenger trains. I've seen the Malleys on passenger trains out of Spokane.
Slow. They're not big drivers.
Well, they could get up, I guess they could get up to about 50 miles an hour after they'd been rebuilt as simple engines.
Okay.
When they were compounds, 25 was about.
Yeah, I was gonna say, compound would be more.
They could cut in with the Dutchman, but you'd run out of steam real quick.
Oh, yeah. Jack Christensen's talked about the Dutchman on driving Malleys on the
Yeah.
MD. So then you've got some other pictures in here.
And then, now these are the electric helpers at
Okay.
Cedar Falls.
And now, what era would this be? 1969, 1970, maybe?
Yeah, this is probably the early 60s, maybe.
Okay.
And here's the Snoqualmie switcher from Enumclaw. There's the scale house right there where we weigh the cars.
And then the bell would be on there, and then the lights. I see
Yeah.
the little lights. And
Yeah,
stuff there.
lights on each side, and then the bell, I think, was on the far side of the wall there.
Okay, when you guys would bring them in and weigh them.
Right. And then here's Cecil Gilhart with a westbound train that hit a snowslide coming into town. And then here's Cecil with the rotary in front of the depot.
Now, I heard that rotary worked Jay tells me that rotary worked pretty well.
Yeah, they converted it over to electric, and it worked good. They had them also so they could work off of the trolley, but from what I understand, the substation operators out here on the Coast Division wouldn't cooperate, and they didn't work well under full trolley load because they would go so fast that they would overspin and the whole dang rotary would start shaking apart. And but on the Rocky Mountain Division, the substation operators there would cut the power almost in half, and they worked pretty good.
Okay.
So they used them under catenary back there, but they pretty much started couple them to a diesel engine to supply about 660 volts or something, and then they worked fine.
Like an old,
On that.
like an FB unit.
Right, there's a substation with the trolley car T1 on the spur there, and then there's the Cedar Falls
Yeah,
substation
the
when it
famous
was,
picture, yeah.
when it was brand new.
What, okay, so that would be what, 1917, 1918?
No, it'd be 1919 or
1919.
or 20.
Or 20. Okay.
Yeah,
And then this is the power supply from City Light or
yeah, I think so. Yeah,
okay, from the dam.
yeah. Now, when I was there, it came in from the far corner over on the other side here, the opposite corner.
So it would have been over here, and this, like in this
Yeah,
picture.
yeah, coming
So
in
it
here.
would have come in that way.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm looking for. Is I'm looking for a picture of this spot right here with the train,
Oh,
with an electric train. But this looks like it's after 1972, right? So
yeah. Well, no, I think this is during the electrification era,
it
but
was.
they were running so few at that time. It was pretty hard to get a picture of one.
Yeah.
Then here you got a bipolar in front of the
Oh
depot.
yeah, that's now what one? Where's that? Is that a National Curtis? You think or?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That was probably early on, like 1920, when it was new, and they were taking publicity photos. And then here we have Fatty Arbuckle on a
Oh,
bipolar at
yeah.
Cedar Falls.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my! Well, they were quite the famous locomotive in their early days.
Well, yeah, and the Olympian was ridden by movie stars and stuff.
And
So
presidents. And
yeah,
your buddy Harding.
I mean, it was a classy train. I just bought recently some teacups from the Olympian. One is a Chicago Milwaukee and Puget Sound cup, which is really rare,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then the other is a Chicago Milwaukee and St. Paul. But they used to have tea time on the train every day, and so they would select one woman passenger to be the hostess for the day, and then she would get a teacup and saucer gift for her participation. And so those things are floating around out there. Now this is just outside of Cedar Falls. This is North Bend Timber Company, Camp 10, and this was a flag stop, and you can see a trail here where loggers would get off the train here and hike into the camp to try and get hired on.
Oh. Okay.
And then this was,
What was that? Yeah, I wanted to ask about.
well, this was the North Bend and Eastern Railroad. This was their logging railroad. It had an overhead crossing of the Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And I have some paperwork on this where when they were putting in the electrification, they weren't using this anymore, and they wanted this removed so they could hang their trolley through
Well,
there.
yeah, you don't want to have. Yeah.
And so I have some correspondence between North Bend Lumber Company and the Milwaukee Road that we'll have a crew out there and dismantle that tomorrow or whatever,
So we can get the electrification.
so the Milwaukee
started.
could get going on their stuff. But
So then this is the original Moncton here then, is
yes,
this photo?
yeah, and this is the earliest photo I have of it. I believe this is probably 1909,
Okay.
and they're building the
Right
depot.
after construction.
Yeah, they're building the depot. The depot's under construction here. This is what they were using prior to that because it's got a Wells Fargo Express sign right there.
Got it.
So trains would stop here and unlock the building and put packages or express and stuff in there, and then somebody would distribute it. They had
And then this is the coaling tower.
that was the coaling tower
Now,
there.
where were they bringing coal from?
Probably Roundup, Montana. Milwaukee had big coal mines there,
Okay. Okay.
and so after 1910, of course, then they started converting all the locomotives over to oil because of the big fire in Idaho.
Oh, at Avery.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
the Milwaukee didn't cause, but they didn't want to be responsible for
No,
one.
well, you know, that was a lot
later,
of timber
so-
that they burned up that they could
Yeah.
have sold.
Exactly. So then the coaling tower got moved to between the legs of the Y and stuff, and so I'm not sure what used coal after that. I know the rotaries did. They never converted the rotaries over to oil because there was no need to. They worked in the winter in the snow. They weren't going to set no fires
Yeah,
in
I guess
place.
they
so-
fire in January.
Right.
Right. So now this is obviously Moncton still, and this is later now. This is 19.
I'm guessing this is around 1911.
Okay.
late 1910. I'm thinking this steam shovel is probably there to help dig out the yard. They're putting in the yard at Moncton because of the Enumclaw branch and the Everett branch.
Right.
The
right.
increased business, they needed a bigger yard there to hold stuff in. And of course, the coaling tower's still there. You got the water tank here that was fed from Hobo Creek.
Right. Right.
And then here's a couple of firemen on the helpers, just posing for their picture there.
And that'd be maybe an Ashel. These are Ashel Curtis's, do we?
These are from another guy named Louis Sheldrew, and he lived out by Ragnar, and he was a Norwegian and a photographer, and he photographed a lot of the early Milwaukee Road stuff, and they ran a local passenger train after they put the Olympian and Columbian on.
Yeah.
They put a local train on that would stop at flag stops and stuff. And they had standing orders to pick up Mr. Sheldrew anywhere he flagged the train and to drop him off at any point that he wanted to be dropped off. So
on the local would do that.
Yeah, what they call the Kittitas local. It ran from Seattle to Kittitas, laid over for about 3 hours, and then made the return run back to Seattle.
Okay.
And that was quite a few miles, so the engineers ran every other day. They had 2 engines assigned to it and 2 engineers. And one engineer would take it over and back one day, the next day the other engineer would take it over and back.
And this would be in the electric era then?
No, this was during the steam era.
During the steam era?
Yeah.
Okay, glad I got that.
They put it on at the same time they put on the Olympian and Columbian in May of 1911.
Okay.
Because they had a passenger train before that. It was train numbers 3 and 6. And that train would stop at flag stops to let people off and stuff. But once they put the Olympian and Columbian on, those trains would only stop at more important stations. So there was no more service for flag stops like Alice Creek or, Bandera or something like that.
Rockdale.
And stuff. And there was a lot of fishermen that liked to fish up on the Snoqualmie River and stuff up on the pass and Lake Ketchulus and stuff.
Yeah.
And so the Kittitas local also became known as the Fisherman's Special and stuff because a lot of fishermen rode it. And then a lot of people from the city rode it in the in the fall to go up in the mountains and pick huckleberries.
There you go.
And so they would get off at certain places with their buckets and stuff, and they'd go pick huckleberries all day. And then when the train made its return run, they'd flag it down and
get back on.
Go home to the city and can blueberries or whatever, or huckleberries, whatever they did with them. And so the Kitty Local was a seasonal train. They'd pull it off in the winter and then put it back on in the spring.
And how long did that run till?
That ran until about 1915 or 16, I think.
Okay.
They cut it back from Kittitas to Cle Elum, and that really pissed off the people in Ellensburg because the Ellensburg people were using it pretty heavily, and then they completely bypassed them. And I have a newspaper article where they're expressing their displeasure at the Milwaukee Railroad for cutting them out of that service. But
now this is a classic shot.
Yeah, this is a Ashel Curtis photo that I bought through the Snoqualmie Valley Museum, and you can see these guys are either putting a hand car on or they're taking it off. And then this is a new yard being built down here, and then the depot being built there.
So what, 1912, 13?
No, this would be 1910.
10, okay. Okay.
10 or early 11. This depot was opened in October of 1911.
Oh, okay.
And it was Moncton for a few months, and then it became Cedar Falls.
Okay. And that was, now the electricity for the depot was supplied by City Light.
Right.
For the town. Now the substation too, or the substation was Puget Power?
I believe probably the substation was Puget Power because that's who brought in the 110,000 volt, and they probably tapped off of that for the substation itself.
Okay. Okay. And here's a few more pictures of beautiful Moncton.
Yeah, this is the depot in various, they're getting close to being completed here. There's some piles of lumber sitting in here that they're probably, this is probably bead sealing or something that they're using on the interior walls, so they're probably still working on the inside of it.
It was a very attractive building in its day, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a very nice looking depot.
Very nice.
And I'm pretty much figuring this is opening day. You got everybody all posed out here, so
Well, they're always dressed up in their pictures back then. So.
yeah. A guy named Silby was the first agent to open this station up. And then there was a guy named Raider that was the first trick operator, and I'm thinking that's him right there in the derby hat.
Okay. Now, and then the roof, would that have been a shingle shake roof?
Yeah, that's cedar shingles.
Cedar shingles. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't
Yeah.
want to say it too fast, though, because then I tongue twist myself. So, okay. And then here it's Cedar Falls.
Now it's Cedar Falls, and then we got two versions of the Seattle City light sign here.
And then they used oil to heat the depot?
Coal.
Coal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there was somewhere probably across the tracks was what they call a coal and oil house, and they used to have piles of coal inside there, and they just go over with a coal bucket and fill it up and bring it back to feed into the stove.
House in Wisconsin. Yeah.
And then they had what they called coal oil or kerosene in there too for starting the fires and stuff.
Wow, makes sense.
You'd put your coal in there, and then you'd pour your kerosene on there and light it and get the coal going.
So then the train order signal looks like it evolved over time too, didn't it?
Yeah, these train order signals were, I believe, manufactured by the Milwaukee Road and Milwaukee shops. I think they built them themselves. They were kind of unique because each blade was different because the lantern was offset to one side of the pole, whereas on standard train order signals, the lantern is on top of the pole.
Right.
And so both arms are identical.
Right.
But on this, the Milwaukee definitely had a eastbound arm and a westbound arm that were different than each other.
And then they're different, looks like, now explain to me why they're different colors.
Well, because this is the governing one. It's red with a white stripe.
Okay.
And it's to the right of the mast, so that governs trains going this direction.
Which would be eastbound.
Yeah, and this one is white with a black stripe on it, and that's to be ignored going that direction. But on the other side, it'll be red with the white, and this would be the other color on the back side.
Color on the backside, so that way the crew would know which one of those two train order signals that really actually applied to them.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, got it. Makes sense.
So if one was up and one was down, they'd have to determine which one. If their side was up, then they didn't have to get orders.
But then by the time you were there, that had been replaced with an electric signal.
Yeah, it had what they call a color light signal, look almost like a traffic signal.
Yes. Okay, and then this picture shows the city light line too, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is the line that comes down from the dam and went into the town there. Oh. And then that had a spur to the power plant. And then this is that westbound train sitting there steaming away.
Yeah, it's losing steam everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And then this is the original oil plant before the big sump was built. They pumped it directly out of tank cars and into this.
So when was the sump built then, roughly?
The sump?
Yeah.
1912, I think.
Oh, that early. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, they started converting over to oil in 1910, right after that fire. So pretty much all of 1911 on, they were pretty much running on oil.
Okay.
And so they started putting these temporary plants in at different stations until they could get a permanent plant built. And then this is the Everett line here, and so the Everett line was opened in the fall of 1911.
So this is before that?
So this is 1910 probably.
Got it. Okay, I see.
And that's the grade for the Everett line, and then that's the actual railroad of the North Bend Lumber Company from their mill in Edgewick.
Well, now this young lady is all dressed up for this photograph. What's going on there?
Yeah, she's the postmistress for Moncton,
Really?
and her husband, Charlie Stewart, was the helper conductor. Now, the helpers originally just had an engineer and a fireman. And
Okay.
after 1911, the Washington State passed a full crew law, and that required a conductor on the helper. And so they used to jokingly call the conductor the engineer's messenger boy, because now the conductor had to go to the telegraph office and get their orders and bring them to the engineer, whereas the engineer would get the orders before when he was
Just go get him
the boss.
himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they put the conductor on, and he really had nothing to do other than they'd send him to the telegraph office to go
Get
fetch the orders, and then called him the engineer's messenger boy.
So but they're all dressed. I mean, this
Well,
is some Sunday
They're
thing, isn't
well,
it?
no, they're putting in the switch for the Everett line.
Oh. Okay.
So this is the inauguration of the Everett branch going into service, and so they're just
a
posing
few
for
months
the.
later from the picture above there.
So they had a photographer in town to commemorate that event, and so they're just out there posing.
Well, they look very nice in those photos. Too.
Yeah. So her name was Hattie Stewart, and his name was Charlie Stewart.
Okay.
And I think later he was a conductor on the Everett pasture train.
Oh, when would that run?
Well, right after the
It started early and then.
well, April of 1912. They started freight on the Everett line in November. In fact, it was funny because I think it was November 12th, 1911, that the Everett line opened for service. If they had just opened it one day earlier, it would have been 11/11/11. But they didn't put passenger trains on until April of 1912 because they built so much of the Everett line on fill that they wanted a flood or two to
Kind of see what
come
they
in,
really
and
have.
so the fill would sink and stuff, and they'd have to come in and redo that. So they didn't want to start running passenger trains too early because they were afraid that they might get some bad derailments from the fill settling.
Okay.
So by April, they figured that everything was pretty much intact.
Stabilized.
So then they put the Everett line passenger train on, and the initial passenger train. I'll thumb through some of this other. This is Fernwood Depot being moved.
Oh my.
There's Enumclaw when it was brand new.
Yeah.
Here's North Bend Depot when it was brand new.
Wow.
That's the depot. I had a dream to buy this depot from the Milwaukee and move it and restore it back to 1911 looks. And they ended up putting it up for sale way before I was ready.
Yeah.
And I couldn't, I didn't have enough money to buy a piece of property in North Bend to move it to. I did inquire about moving it, and I could afford to move it about a mile.
Okay.
But I couldn't find any property I could buy within a mile. But
Now let's back up to that picture of Enumclaw for a minute here, because we've got some very interesting elements in this Enumclaw photo.
this one here,
Yeah, look at this.
yeah. Well, what amazes me is the double train order signal, because this track only went about 80 feet past the depot. So you wonder how many train orders did they issue
Going the other way.
going that direction.
But that's a McKean car, isn't it?
No, it's actually a General Electric Brill car.
A Brill. Okay.
Yeah, they bought a pair of these, one for the Everett line and one for the Enumclaw line. The Enumclaw line run from Enumclaw to Seattle. It would go to Enumclaw to Cedar Falls, go up to the depot, exchange passengers with the Everett train,
Right.
turn on the Y,
Yeah.
and then run to Seattle. And then in the evening, it would come back out of Seattle, meet the train there at Cedar Falls again, turn on the Y, and then go back to Enumclaw.
Oh, so this would be then late in the day on its return trip. Is that right?
Probably, yeah.
They must have had a Y at Enumclaw, where they.
Yeah, at Enumclaw Junction, there was a Y where
there
they
was. Okay.
they actually ran on White River Lumber Company's railroad to get up to their depot there.
Oh.
And the agent at Enumclaw was actually the chief dispatcher for this short piece of track that was the White River Lumber Company.
Oh,
And
interesting.
we can't figure out if he was actually the train dispatcher for Weyerhaeuser's railroad also, or if he just had control of that little chunk of their railroad. But here's the other one for the Everett line.
So this would be up on the Everett line.
Yeah, and this is at Stewart. At that time it was called Carnation, but this was the spur for Carnation Farms.
Right.
And they hauled in 25 head of Holstein purebred cattle to unload for the farms here. And so they ran it down on a special train with the motor car.
And then this would be the start of Carnation and the Carnation products and condensed milk and all.
Yeah,
that.
he built a condensery at Monroe, and this milk from the Carnation farms and the other farmers in the valley would get picked up on the train and taken to Monroe and unloaded. This was a $100,000 bull calf that E.A. Stewart bought at an auction, and it was the most expensive purchase of a cow at that point.
King Sylvia.
And so they shipped it in this Chicago, Milwaukee, and Puget Sound refrigerator car.
Oh.
And put this big old banner on, and they got a photographer to come out and take some pictures of it. It was,
so that's actually,
and they even had
right there.
evidently had
Movies.
movie
Yeah.
footage of it
I'm
too.
looking at this. Quite something.
And that's the depot at Duval, which still exists.
Well, that would be a warm. I mean, that's one of your favorite places. Isn't it?
Yeah, that's where I grew up.
Yeah, exactly.
This is down in the valley there. This is the Milwaukee coming out of Duval,
Okay.
heading towards Monroe. And then here's the parallel Great Northern line. GN had a branch from Monroe to Carnation at one time for 18 miles.
They did.
Yeah,
Oh, I did not. So they served the farm too then.
yeah. They built through the valley at the same time,
Mm.
side by side,
Side by side.
and opened them up for the GN opened their line in May of 1911, and the
Yeah.
Milwaukee opened theirs in November.
Oh.
So they were
Okay.
the Milwaukee, of course, had to build 54 miles of line, and the GN only had to build 18. So
Because they were coming from Monroe
from Monroe to Carnation.
versus coming up.
It was
from-
supposed to go to Falls City, and they even had plans to go up through Dutch Miller Gap and back to Wenatchee, and it was going to be a secondary main line that had less grades than Stevens Pass.
Really. But
So-
then it never.
So if it had materialized, you might today have BNSF trains running through Duval and Carnation.
Oh, boy. That didn't. Yeah.
But anyway, this is a panoramic view where you got the line coming in here, and then you got the line going the other
I
way.
see. Oh, it is a panorama. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it.
There's the other half of it, and there's the line going towards Monroe.
Now what do we got here?
This is the what they called the Stillwater Logger. Here's a little better picture of it. This train would run down to Stillwater from Everett, and Stillwater was between Carnation and Duval.
Okay.
And it's where the Cherry Valley Logging Company had a big camp and logging railroad up in the hills. And they would deliver the Milwaukee anywhere up to 60 cars of logs a day.
Oh, that's a lot of logging.
And so the Milwaukee put a special train on called the Stillwater Logger. And this is at High Rock. This is the Great Northern line
I was
here.
just going to ask you.
This is now presently Highway 203 that you drive on.
Okay. Okay.
And then the Milwaukee grade, of course, is still there.
And then what are these in the just?
These are some farms over there, and then you have Tualco. You can actually see the Tualco school in here somewhere if you look at if you blow the picture up and look at it. But this would be over here would be the Honor Farm today, which is some kind of methane farm or something there now that they have. But it was operated by the Monroe prison system, and it was a dairy farm that prisoners could work at and learn the farming trade, so that when they got out of prison, they could
You get a job doing something.
get a job for
Working for a farm.
for working for a local dairy farm or
Yeah,
something.
exactly. Well, I remember those dairy farmers. You know, they're just like the weathermen. They never have a day off.
Yeah,
They get
exactly.
milk twice a day.
And so you got the conductor here, you got brakeman out here riding on top of the caboose,
Yeah. Oh, no one does that.
and then
anymore.
there's a guy on the log car right
Oh,
there,
my.
and then there's another guy leaning against this log car over here.
What do you think the diameter of some of those logs
And
are?
these tracks here belong to the High Rock Logging Company.
Oh, they do.
And so they also interchange logs to the Milwaukee.
Okay.
That's where these logs are from. on the Great Northern Spur.
Oh,
So,
and so they would interchange with both then.
yeah.
Okay.
And then this is an excursion that they ran when they opened passenger service on the Everett line.
Mm.
It ran up to North Bend and then came back, and so now it's on its return trip back, and it's let off so many passengers that now they can set out a car and get rid of one of the extra cars. So that's why this passenger car is sitting on the siding, and they're at the tank taking on water, and meanwhile the crowd looks like they're probably returning, but the crowd went up to the condensery up here and had a tour of the Carnation
Interesting.
milk plant there. And then you can see a little bit of the Monroe Depot and the train order signal there.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. The photographer got it just right.
Yeah.
Take a note of that, Josh.
And this is another one of Monroe. This is a bigger crop of this picture. What this is a 8-wheeler
Okay.
locomotive. There was very few of these out on the west end of the railroad, but this one was assigned to the Everett line with a coach, and this ran a kind of a interurban service between Everett, Monroe, and Snohomish to compete with the Everett Snohomish interurban.
Oh.
And this would make 7 round trips a day between Monroe and Everett.
Wow. Wow. On the between Monroe and Everett, now they would have been running on the Great Northern, wouldn't they have?
No, they had their own line. Milwaukee had their own line into Everett originally.
And when did they switch then to the Great Northern?
1936,
Oh, is that
they
what it
gave
was?
up the line. During the Depression, there was hardly any business, and the Milwaukee couldn't justify maintaining all that trackage
Yeah.
for a piddly little bit of business. So they worked out a deal with the Great Northern to get trackage rights on their line.
Well, that always seemed to be the Milwaukee solution. When in doubt, see if they can use somebody else's track.
Right, and you can see one of the Milwaukee's famous
Chevrons.
switch stands there.
Oh yeah.
But what they did is they put a headlight and a pilot on the back of the tender.
Got it.
So when they got to Monroe, they would just cut off, run around
And
the
then just run
coach,
backwards.
and run the engine backwards back to Everett.
Okay.
But anyway, this was replaced with the motor car that came out that I told you. They had one for Enumclaw line and one for Everett line.
Right. Right.
Well, the initial Everett line one ran between.
So what era would that have been?
That would have been 1912.
This is 1912.
And then at the beginning of 1913, this was replaced with the motor car,
Okay,
the
there you
gas
go.
electric
Okay,
motor
so
car.
that
Yeah,
really does freeze it in a period of time.
yeah. This is the Snohomish Depot, and you can see the Wells Fargo Express sign on there. But this was originally Wilbur Drug Company building, and I think he lived upstairs. And so when the Milwaukee got a hold of it, the agent lived upstairs.
Oh, okay, guys, that's not a
And
traditional.
this is that excursion train that we saw at Monroe.
Yeah.
This is the crowd waiting at Snohomish to get on the train there.
Do I see it? Do I even see a single woman in that crowd?
No, it was a stag-only affair.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then this is just the same picture in a little crappier
Yeah.
format. Okay, then we jump to the Tacoma Eastern. That's Kapowsen
Housing, yeah. So.
and Eatonville,
Eatonville again. LB.
Alder, Mineral, and Morton.
And you worked all of those.
I worked at Morton. That was a cool place to work.
Oh, I bet,
I got to work there for an entire month one year.
Okay.
And then that's Chehalis. Of course, that was Puget Sound and Willapa Harbor originally, and then the Milwaukee absorbed them into it. Well, Milwaukee owned it the whole time, but
Oh, it did.
I don't know why they did that, but they built the Port Angeles line was the same way. It was ran as the Seattle, Port Angeles, and Western Railroad for several years. And then Milwaukee finally merged it into the St. Paul. But
Okay.
and this is up on McPhail Hill and on the Raymond branch. You can see the caboose. It's on a big
On a big
curved
yeah.
horseshoe loop.
Yeah.
And then here's a Milwaukee caboose that's been lettered PS and WH for Puget Sound and Willapa Harbor.
Oh, okay.
And that's a Milwaukee work train building the Raymond branch. But what's interesting here
Yeah.
is that is a caboose. The Milwaukee had a bunch of boxcars that they built into cabooses,
Okay.
and they had a bench on the roof, and that's where you sat to observe the train. And there's
Oh,
a
man.
series of articles that was published back in Railroad Magazine back in the 40s
Okay.
by a guy who was a brakeman out here on the Milwaukee Road when the line first
We've got
opened.
some of those, yeah.
And it's called Wanderlust, and it was a guy named Maxwell Swan that
Boomer.
that wrote about it. He was a boomer, and he was out here, and he heard that the Milwaukee Road was hiring, so he went to Malden and hired on,
Okay.
and then he wrote a whole bunch about his experiences. And he talks about these cabooses with the benches on the roof, but nobody had ever seen any before. And so this picture finally cropped up, and I saw that, and I go, oh my God, that's one of those
I got to get this one.
cabooses with the benches on them. And the guy, there was a guy that wrote 3 books about Milwaukee cabooses at the Milwaukee
Yes.
Historical Society.
Kehoe, I think,
Jeff
something.
Kehoe, yeah.
Right.
And when I told him about these, he was so sad because he didn't know anything about these when he did his book on the wooden cabooses.
Oh, that would have been a perfect one.
And he doesn't think the wooden caboose book will ever get redone.
No, well,
They've done the other 2 have been reprinted and updated. But he said the wooden caboose book sold so poorly that he doesn't think they would ever consider redoing it. This is Port Townsend. This is the barge landing there.
so I got a story I got to tell you about that barge landing. So they were having, Frank told us, because Frank worked for the Seattle and North Coast.
Right.
And he was a train master. And he said that they were having this really bad storm out there, and he was afraid he was going to lose the slip. So they took a bunch of boxcars and parked them out there. And he said, you know, that was really a dumb idea. I mean, those things, all kinds of things could have gone wrong.
Well, that was kind of a standard thing. They did that on the Monroe Bridge when it was flooding the river. The Skykomish River was flooding really bad.
Yeah.
So they shoved a whole string of gondola cars out there filled with rock, thinking that the weight would help hold the bridge in place. Yeah. No, they all got washed into the river. They're probably still there. But see, in the early days, there was a depot out on the slip because there was a ship called the Sioux. There was a passenger liner that would come from Seattle and drop off passengers here at the barge slip, and then the train from Port Angeles would come in here, come out and pick passengers up, and then go up to town and then head back to Twin Rivers.
Well, and I'm trying to think. I don't remember ever seeing a Y out there before.
Yeah, this leg got burned up by kids setting the fire out there, I think in the 1950s or something. And when I went out there, you could still see a lot of the stubs sticking out of the water when the low tide was there. But yeah, that Y got taken out of service by some vandals. Then this is up on Snoqualmie Pass. This is a rotary train that they ran that took 9 days to get from Easton to Garcia.
Oh my.
What they did is when they first built the line over Snoqualmie Pass, the first winter, they just let it snow over and didn't do anything with it. Well, then comes spring, 1909, they want to start getting the line open because they want to get this thing up and running by summer.
Right.
So they put together a rotary train, and they had to carry their own coal, their own water, because there was no water tanks or coal supplies yet. And they started out from Easton, and it took them 9 days to work their way over the pass. Some of those cuts had 4 feet of ice over the top of the rails where the snow was maybe 20 feet deep, but the snow kept melting and then refreezing, and it caused ice on the bottom that they had to chisel through. And so this was the rotary, and of course they're using these really old 10-wheelers for power because they didn't have any big engines out here.
Where's that at?
Now this is up at Laconia, and this is a double rotary plow.
Okay.
You got a rotary on each end, and then you got 2 of those prairie engines.
Yeah.
And then note the canvas over the tenders.
I'm looking at that.
Because the water and stuff coming up there in the past would freeze the coal in the tenders if they didn't keep it dry. And then this is pretty much the whole crew that it takes to run this double rotary. you had 2 engineers and a poor fireman back here that had to shovel coal like crazy.
Hand shoveling coal for the rotary.
Yep.
Firemen hand shoveling coal for the locomotives. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you had, you know, engineer and fireman and probably a conductor
Well, you had a conductor.
for all that.
Yeah.
And then you had your supervisory personnel and all that stuff. So that's pretty much your payroll to run a rotary plow.
There were a lot of people back then.
And people love to get their pictures taken with the plows. So I have several of these group photo things from various years up there.
So then the eras are kind of changing here then?
Yeah, this is mostly all up in Laconia, and of course that was all done by 1915. So
Okay.
these are all between 1910 and 1915. This is another double rotary. They called the double rotary a bull moose on the Milwaukee. That was their slang for it. And then this rotary plow has the entire name on it, whereas these other ones just had CM and PS
Yeah, yeah.
stenciled on them. This one got the entire name because this rotary plow ended up at the Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition.
Ah.
It was on display there, and so it got the whole Milwaukee name painted onto it for publicity purposes. But
A rotary snow shovel.
But I don't know what happened to this thing because I have the negative. I have the original negative of this. I found it on eBay and I bid on it and got it.
Oh, wow, that'd be expensive.
And a friend of mine took that and he blew it up and he was able to get the builder's plate with the serial number and stuff.
Okay.
But the serial number does not match the Milwaukee Road snowplow number 12. That serial number is applied to some Alco locomotive that was built around the same time. Okay. So I'm guessing that this was thrown together for the Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition and then ended up going back to the shops or whatever and getting redone, and they gave it a new builder's plate and then assigned that number to the next locomotive they built. I don't know what the reason why it doesn't match, but
hold that one up so we can see it on the
now that's a 30-foot snowdrift at Rockdale.
And these guys are out there in their derby hats.
Right, and this guy is wearing what on the railroad they call these 1,000-miler shirts.
Oh,
and
I've never heard that term before.
Yeah,
tell me more.
Well, a normal run was 100 miles, was
Right.
a day's pay.
Yep.
So I guess you could wear these shirts for 10 trips, and then you have to go to the laundry. So they were called 1,000-miler shirts. But this was the preferred shirt of boomers.
Oh.
So this guy could be a boomer. I don't have any ID for any of these people. But
Ragnar.
yeah, now this is the Kittitas local I told you about.
Okay.
And there's some guy hanging off the side of the bridge there.
Yikes.
But this is the train that ran from Seattle to Kittitas and back. And then this is Mine Creek Bridge when they're replacing steel with the timber, because they set up portable sawmills and cut all this timber out of trees that they cleared off the right-of-way.
Right.
And built these temporary bridges, but they built them in such a fashion that they could put the steel in as they stood, so they didn't have to shut the line down and stuff, and they could.
Because they're just substituting it right here, and then you just take the wooden bridge down.
Yep.
Okay.
And this is just a crop of this, showing the locomotive in better detail, and then you have a Chicago, Milwaukee, and Puget Sound caboose.
Got it.
On it, which those were kind of rare, but. And then this is probably a helper crew at Cedar Falls,
okay,
or possibly a work train. This is a mystery. We don't know where this picture was taken. I'm guessing maybe Seattle, but I don't know. But you got a bipolar,
yeah,
and then you have the oldest steam locomotive on the Coast Division. Alongside of it, everybody's dressed up in period costumes.
And she's got a bottle of champagne. It looks like
Yeah.
she's going to break a bottle of champagne on it.
Well, we kind of know when this happened, because what she's doing is she's christening the new Olympian.
Ah.
And this was a train that had all roller bearing equipment.
Okay.
And it was called the Queen of the Rails. And so she's the queen,
Okay.
for the celebration, and then everybody's dressed up in old period clothing.
Yeah, this is a big deal.
And I've seen another view of this same picture too, but we can't figure out where this is taken, whether this is, with all this planking and stuff, I'm thinking it's either Seattle or Tacoma.
But then you look at the bushes back here and you go, I mean, that looks almost like a pine tree, doesn't it?
Yeah. And this is, I think, around 1927 or something is when they put that all roller bearing Olympian on.
Okay.
I do have a date for that, but just the location is mystifying us. Where the heck they held this celebration? I can't seem to find anything in the Milwaukee employee magazines about it or nothing. And then this last one that's the McKean car.
I'm familiar with that car.
Yeah,
You know where that?
The Colson, yeah.
Yeah, the Colson.
And this, I was told by Milwaukee employees that this car laid in Joseph Simon's scrapyard in Tacoma clear into the 1950s.
I wouldn't doubt it. Well, that was always a kind of a, there was always all kinds of interesting stuff in that, right there. So, in that Joseph Simon. So,
pulled that dang thing off again, didn't I?
Yeah, I know. It just keeps coming off. So, let's go.
I'm not used to movie star life.
It's okay. Gosh, you've just been on a roll, Alan. But you haven't. You gotta be. This has just got to be great, right?
Yeah, it's fun talking about all this
Gosh,
stuff.
yeah. You've just been on a roll.
Otherwise, I got to sit and talk to myself, and then my wife starts calling the authorities.
No.
My husband's babbling to himself again in the room. I wonder if you could give him a checkup. Give him another brain scan.
So what else before we wrap up on the day? What else? What have we not talked about that is important to you that we want to share in today's conversation?
Well, I think we pretty much covered
a lot of ground today.
A lot of it, yeah.
I mean, this has just been great. I mean, it's been an engaging conversation and a lot of good memories, and I think we just may have to do this again.
Yeah, the Milwaukee was the best job I ever had.
Yeah.
I always say I'm thankful that it was a leap year, and so that my last day of work was February the 29th. So I got to work one extra day that I wouldn't have gotten to work. And then nowadays I only have to cry in my beer once every 4 years that I lost my job.
There you go. Oh, that's a great anecdote.
But yeah, it was kind of sad. They shut us down in October, right at Halloween.
Yeah.
And in '79.
Yeah.
We got shut down for a week. And at Kent, we had some unique train order hoops there.
Yeah.
We got these newer hoops that went in a trackside telescoping stand.
So you didn't have to stand next to
they just had a short handle that fit into the stand.
Yeah.
Well, they kept breaking because we had to hoop up heavy stuff like bundles of waybills and stuff because of pickups at West Siding and stuff like that.
Okay.
And so those heavy loads in there was too much for them, and they kept breaking. The wooden frame would break where the rods go into it.
Right.
And so we had breakage on 2 or 3 of those ones already, and we thought we're going to run out of hoops at this rate. So we had a guy working there named Ted Pope, and he had a friend that worked for Boeing. So he took one of those hoops to his friend at Boeing and said, "Could you make these out of some kind of metal so they wouldn't break?" So he did. He went in there and he engineered them out of aluminum.
Oh.
And they even had a screw-in handle on them and everything. They were pretty slick. And that ended our breakage problems. And I used to brag that Kent had the only train order hoops that were engineered by Boeing Aerospace. And so when they shut down in October of 1979, Ted had already left the Milwaukee and was working for Burlington Northern.
Oh, that's right.
Down at Kelso, I believe. Anyway, he called me up and he said, "I heard you guys are going to shut down." And I said, "Yeah, that's the rumor." He said, "Well, will you grab those train order hoops because I want those back?" So I grabbed them and took them home. And then I was home about 5 days, I think, and the agent down at Kent called me up, said, Alan, I need you to bring those train order hoops back. We're going back to work. So I had to run them back down there. And then when they shut down in 1980, I figured it was going to be another false alarm thing that, the government would come in and put us back on. So I didn't take them that time. And that was the end of it.
Yeah,
and
that was
so
the end of it.
and so I don't know what happened to those train order hoops, but yeah, that was pretty slick. Boeing manufactured hoops.
Yeah, the hoops we go through.
And we never had any more breakage on them.
I wouldn't think so. That was aluminum.
But some of the crazy things that happened is I'd put the bundle of waybills and stuff out there in the hoop, and the train would be slowly pulling by the depot, and a band or something sticking out of another car would hit the hoop and knock the waybills out, and they'd land on the platform. And then we'd have to run out there and restring them before the caboose got there.
Oh, man.
And one time they fell off and rolled off the platform and up against the rail. And so I'm laying on my belly, reaching under there to get that.
While the train is going by.
While the train is going by. And so with one eye, I'm looking for bands and crap hanging out of the cars. Because one just took out the train list,
Yeah.
And in the other hand, I'm trying to get the bundle of train orders, but I'm trying not to put my finger on top of the rail and get my fingers cut off by the moving wheels going by.
Did you get it?
And I got it out and got it restrung, and I thought to myself, God, the things we'll go through to not have to tell the dispatcher that we effed up,
Yeah.
I'm willing to put my life on the line here to not stop this train so that we can keep them moving.
Yeah, that is great. Wow. That was a really, really fun time. We had a lot to talk about.
Yeah. Well, you see why I love the job so much.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
You almost hated to take a paycheck. It was like...
You were just like, do you know Jack Christensen very well?
No, I really don't know him that well.
Like
I've met him at a couple of railroad events. I think up at Tunnel Days or something up in Skycomish once.
Sure. Well, he was 57 years, and we can remember him. We can remember him saying, "I don't know why they gave us a paycheck because we were having so much fun."
Yeah.
And he kept going after age 70.
Right.
Because he just liked driving trains so
Yeah.
much.
I've read a lot of his stuff. He wrote several stories for Ruth X when she was doing that series of Rail Tales books. I think there's 5 of those books out or something like that.
Yeah,
Anyway,
okay.
I have them all, but anyway, because I contributed some stories and photographs to that too.
You did.
But so every time a new book come out, I always got a copy of it. But Jack also painted the covers for some of those books too.
Yeah. Josh and I have done some programming with Jack, a couple different programs with Jack, and so now I'm got to get a hold of him one more time, and so we can do something on Lester.
I think Kent Sullivan. I think him and Jack went down there and explored those abandoned trestles out of Snoqualmie Falls on the old NP line. When they abandoned that, there was 2 or 3 big high trestles this side of Snoqualmie Falls. The passenger train or the tourist train backs out onto one of them.
Right.
That's still standing, but there was a couple more down the line there
further west.
Yeah, that are dismantled now, or mostly dismantled. I think there's still some.
One that went over I-90.
Yeah, that one was totally dismantled, and there was one also over the road that goes from Falls City up to Preston.
That's right.
Because I remember driving under that one a lot, but there's a couple up there that's just over ravines or whatever, and I think him and Jack Christensen went hiking up there and documented those, because Kent wrote a article for the Main Streeter about those.
He's a prolific author for the Main Streeter. Do you read the Main Streeter then?
I have a few copies. I belonged to the NP Historical Society for a few years, so I have a few copies from that era, but I'm no longer a member. I don't belong to any
Oh,
historical groups
no
anymore.
MRHA.
No, I belonged to MRHA a couple, 3 times, and every time I was a member of them, their magazine would come out and it'd be nothing but stuff on the east end of the Milwaukee, which I have no interest in. And then I'd just give up my membership, and then as soon as I give up my membership, then they start publishing stuff about Lines West. But
Exactly.
but I never saw anything about Lines West that I didn't already know, so I just finally got to the point where I just gave up the membership because I wasn't seeing anything new to me that anybody was coming up. In fact, I recall when MRHA and Daryl Dewald's book or his little newsletters. It was
Mill West.
called Lines West Lines or
Yes,
something like that.
Yes, yeah.
Anyway, I remember when they discovered that there was a Chicago, Milwaukee, and Puget Sound railroad. They didn't even know that, and this was several years after the Milwaukee had shut down. That this revelation came to them that the railroad was originally called the Chicago, Milwaukee, and Puget Sound, and somehow I knew that when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And so I'd known that for years. In fact, I specifically collect Chicago, Milwaukee, and Puget Sound stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have out in that shed. I got a bulletin board from Beverly. That's a crew bulletin board, not like the Cedar Falls one where it shows the trains running late or whatever.
Right.
That's a passenger bulletin board.
Okay.
The one in there is for the helper crews out of Beverly and the Hanford branch.
Oh,
And these were bulletins that were put up for the crews to use for they were like slow orders. They put out a slow order, but if it was going to be out for a long time, then they'd put it on a bulletin.
Right.
Instead of
Issue
train
an
orders
order
all
every
the time.
day.
Yeah. And stuff. And so anyway, when I first went to work at Beverly, when I walked into that depot that first day, first thing that hit my eyes was that bulletin board with CM and PS Railway Company painted across the top of it. And I thought, oh God, I want this bulletin board. Well, I couldn't take it then. But when the depot finally got closed, I went over there and it had been vandalized already. The doors were kicked in, windows all broken and stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought, just by the grace of God, nobody's recognized
The value
this
of this
bulletin board. So I pried that sucker off the wall, took it home. And on the back, it has Agent Beverly Washington, and then it says care of Superintendent Mall. So Alexander Henry Mall was superintendent at Malden only for a short period of time, from 1909 until the end of 1910. So I know that bulletin board came to Beverly in 1909, and Richard Roselli was the agent at Beverly at that time.
Okay.
And I found Richard Roselli as a Great Northern agent at Vulcan, Washington, on the Great Northern.
Vulcan.
At the time that the Milwaukee was shipping parts for the Beverly Bridge, they were unloading them off the GN at Vulcan onto a boat called the St. Paul.
Yeah.
And it would go down to Beverly and deliver the parts for the bridge.
Okay.
And so I'm guessing that Roselli had got the ear of some Milwaukee official and said, well, when you guys start up the railroad and want to start hiring agents, I'd like to come work for you. And so he got to open the depot at Beverly and became the agent at Beverly. And he was agent at Beverly until they built the Hanford line, and then he went down and was the first agent at White Bluffs, I think it was.
Really? Interesting.
And he was the last agent at Duval when they closed the Duval depot in 1936. So then he went to Carnation and he retired there as the agent at Carnation. But anyway, so
one thing I've got for you that you maybe haven't seen is Frank Zellerhoff gave MRHA a manuscript on all of his time at Cedar Falls.
Oh.
And they kept it for about 5 years. didn't do anything with it, and with no notice to anybody, all of a sudden published it. And Dave Sproul and I had been spending time with Frank trying to, fix some of the things. They're talking about electricity, and it doesn't take long for our heads to start spinning when that happens.
Right.
And so I've got a copy of that. I'll mail it to you.
Okay.
So that you get a chance to look at that, because that might be something new. I'm not going to guarantee it, but it might be.
Okay.
So.
Well, I'm gonna go use the restroom.
Okay, and unplug you, and we're going to wrap up here.